July 25, 1965, Bob Dylan played an electric guitar at the Newport Folk Festival. Before this, folk music was acoustic, and the audience was mostly college students and activists. After the electrification of folk in 1965, a new subgenre emerged. The invention of folk rock revolutionized counterculture by making the music of the youth generation more politically focused. This meant that more people were receiving anti-war messages, contributing to the strong anti-war movement of the 60s. In the 30s, folk music started to gain popularity, characterized by its traditional sound and political messaging. Early folk was mostly listened to by the working class. However, over time, folk evolved so that the audience was mostly college students. Lyrics put emphasis on honesty and meaning, often political, left-leaning, and rebellious. Bob Dylan's song, Blowing in the Wind, perfectly illustrates the symbolic lyrics of folk music in the 60s.
How many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
Rock, on the other hand, had lighter lyrics and started in the 50s. After the invention of the solid-body electric guitar in 1940, becoming the primary voice of youth counterculture in the early 60s. In the late 50s and early 60s, tension was already high, with the aftermath of World War II, the beginning of the Cold War, and the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement causing a polarized political climate in the United States. But with the addition of the Vietnam War, a war that many people deemed unnecessary, the tense political environment grew to the point of many young people distrusting the government and the defined anti-war movement of the 60s. The Newport Folk Festival was an important event in the folk community, showcasing the icons of the folk movement. 1965 was the fifth festival since 1959, when the Newport Folk Festival was founded. It featured many big figures in folk, including Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, Peter, Paul and Mary, and Bob Dylan. On the last day of the festival, Dylan played his electric guitar, marking a change not only in folk, but in 60s counterculture as a whole. There were different reactions to Dylan going electric. Pete Seeger, one of the directors at the Newport Folk Festival and an important part of Dylan's music career, famously said,
"I was furious that the sound was so distorted you could not understand a word that he was singing. He was singing a great song, Maggie's Farm, a great song, but you couldn't understand it. And I ran over to the sound man and said, fix the sound so you can understand him. And they hollered back, no, this is the way they want it. I don't know who they was. But I was so mad, I said, damn, if I had an axe, I'd cut the cable right down. I really was that mad.
At the end of the first performance, the audience responded with both cheering and booing, but overall, the performance was regarded as one for the better, with one newspaper saying, "The hardcore of Dylanites rationalizes the Electrification project as a departure for the good. And if one has the right to pioneer a sound within the framework of folk, Dylan has earned this chance to explore this new frontier." But this wasn't just a change for Dylan, it was a change for music in general. After Dylan went electric, many folk artists did the same, creating one of the most influential genres of the Vietnam War era, folk rock. Folk rock combined the lyrics of folk and the sounds of rock. Suddenly, the political lyrics of folk became the lyrics of mainstream youth music. Going electric created a sense of urgency in protest music that traditional folk wasn't able to give. Folk rock songs became anthems for anti-war protests. Eve of Destruction was banned on many radio stations because of its anti-war lyrics.
You're old enough to kill, but not for voting. You don't believe in war, but what's that gun you're toting? And even the Jordan River has bodies floating, but you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve.
For what it's worth, though not originally an anti-war protest song, became a key part of anti-war counterculture.
Young people speaking their minds are getting so much resistance from behind. Time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Fortunate Son poked at the unfairness of the draft, singing about how class affected who was sent to Vietnam. After the Kent State shootings, Counterculture reacted with a folk rock song, Ohio.
Twin soldiers and Nixon's coming. We're finally on our own. This summer I hear the drumming. For dead in Ohio. Gotta get down to it. Soldiers are coming us round. Should have been done long ago.
Wherever the war went, folk rock was soon to follow. Folk rock gave folk a microphone so that people heard. Not everyone sided with the vocal movement and protests of the 60s. In President Nixon's 1969 speech, he addresses who he refers to as the silent majority.
I know it may not be fashionable to speak of patriotism or national destiny these days, but I feel it is appropriate to do so.
Nixon's speech addressed the United States as it was in the 60s, divided in two. On August 18, 1969, Jimi Hendrix played the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock entirely on electric guitar. This was the opposite of folk, at least by appearance. It had no lyrics, was solely electric, and sounded completely different from folk. But folk songs were often traditional, and the Star-Spangled Banner was definitely traditional among Americans. And although Hendrix didn't sing the lyrics, he didn't need to. Everyone knew them already. Instead, Hendrix posed his opinions not through words, but through sounds. He used funeral music and police sirens to express his opinions about the war. A lot of people found Jimi Hendrix's performance disrespectful. One newspaper said, "Imagine how those same offended, dare we say, uptight people will react to Jimi Hendrix's handling of the number." That's right, big, bad Jimi Hendrix performing the Star-Spangled Banner. But when people thought his performance was disrespectful, he said, "We're all Americans." It was like, "Go America." We play it the way the air is in America today. The air is slightly static, see? Hendrix's performance showed how far protest music had come in half a decade, showing how protest music evolved to fit the time in the war, and how one of the most articulate protest acts in the Vietnam War era didn't even have words. It was entirely electric. Though Hendrix's performance wasn't folk rock, like Dylan before him, it pushed the limits of protest music and set the stage in the anti-war movement for the final years of the Vietnam War. When Bob Dylan played his electric guitar at the Newport Folk Festival, less than a year after the United States started sending Americans to the Vietnam War, he changed folk to fit the time. In the heated era of the Vietnam War, folk really couldn't have survived on its own, so it evolved. All it needed was for someone to plug it in.